open till it shatters through the ocean. I wanna make shockwaves.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, cats, dogs, and other farm animals, this is Irinia, and welcome to episode 35 of Kerbal Space Chronicles. Now, what you're seeing here in 4 times regular speed is the launch of my first launch of my new moon plan. Originally, I'd planned to land on the moon with 3 vehicles. Now, for better or worse, I eventually cut that down to 2. We'll see how that goes in a future episode. But for now, this is Project Fargo. I basically took an N1 rocket, strapped a bunch of extra fuel tanks in it, and then up at the top is a fuel pod. Basically, it's something I've designed to carry extra fuel in orbit of the moon for my actual lander vehicle to dock with. Now, we're just going steadily through the launch, and because of all the extra fuel, you see those extra white fuel tanks. This stage is very, very long burning. I can't see exactly how long it went on my little tiny video feed, so I can record this in real time in post with the 4 times, but now we're on the second stage, which, if anything, seems like it burns even slower, but we will be able to get away with what we need in order to take this thing all the way to the moon, and then some, which is why, well, we'll see what happens in future episodes. So the second stage burns, and I'm just very carefully fine-tuning my trajectory, and I decide to go ahead and finally adjust that physics setting to keep that really horrific bug from going to 10 times time acceleration from happening again. I set it to 2, 4, and 6. Depending on testing, I might go to 2, 4, and 8 in terms of physical time. But for now, we're lighting the third stage. Second stage drops away. And we're just steadily burning up to the speed we need. Just checking through the parts, making sure I'm not burning fuel from the pod. I've decoupled the nose cone, but it hasn't separated yet because we are still in space. Now, I actually burned at 4 times physical time acceleration there, which was a bit of a stupid move, but either way, we end up... And there's the kitties in the background again. We end up making our way out of the atmosphere and then just setting up our basic maneuvers, deploying the solar panels so that way this spacecraft has power. There will be some struggles with that later in this episode, too. But there we go, we've got the solar panels deployed. We're time accelerating to the orbit insertion maneuver, drifting a little from the node, so I just drop out of time warp, let the spacecraft adjust. And then I decide to just use 2 times physical time acceleration to get in. We get a 40,000 fund boost. And there's the kitties messing around again, including climbing on the computer, which they're really not supposed to do. Oh, kitties. But now we're setting up our transfer to the moon. And the good news for me is that I actually started realizing that I may have overbuilt this a little, because I just wanted to get the fuel pod to the moon. But it's looking like I might actually have some of the transfer stage left. And of course, the more fuel I've got, the better my situation is on landing. So we just fine-tune the maneuver to get the orbit insertion I want. And then, of course, I don't even use it to go all the way in, but I cut the maneuver and do it myself. So there we go. We've lit the third stage, which is just going to burn the remainder of its fuel. And that actually gets most of the work done, which is part of why I decided to cancel the second launch of my 3-launch plan, which would have been Project Honolulu. I'll probably reuse that name for something else at some point. And just went with Project Fargo, the 1 fuel pod. This may or may not have been a good thing, as you'll see in future episodes. Just making sure Project Fargo gets plenty of signal all the way out to the moon. Now we're in lunar orbit. Of course, I set up a circularization burn. Tell my spacecraft to point at the node. And then time accelerate down to the node. We come out, and there we go. I've just scrapped Project Honolulu. And there's the burn, putting the transfer stage and the fuel pod into orbit. Now that one I wanted to get as circular as possible, and I told the spacecraft to point retro. Now that Project Fargo's in orbit, we have this fuel pod, we have that extra supply of fuel, we even have the transfer stage. So now it's time to move on. This is Project Houston. You notice instead of using an N1-based design, I went ahead with a Saturn V, except this time it's kind of a Saturn IV, since I only used 4 engines. I didn't actually need the 5th, and as you know, more engines means less actual delta V. More things to go wrong, and stuff like that, so I went with 4. The Saturn's a much easier flight. Just have to be careful to tune the throttle so that way we're not accelerating too much in the lower atmosphere. Other than that, it's a very ordinary Saturn V flight. We just go ahead and dump the first stage, light up the second. There goes the S2 and its 5 engines. And this was one of the longest burns so far. The S2 stage does burn for a long time. Even with 5 engines, you'd think it'd burn through all that fuel pretty quickly, but I actually put it into 2 times physical time acceleration. Now, you see me messing around with the pitch. That's just to make sure I don't start falling back into the atmosphere. And of course, as I gain more momentum, I can adjust my pitch accordingly. There we go. You see me mucking around with it again. Now I'm on the S4B stage, except I'm using the S4C engines. I decided to go ahead and go that route. Now, this insertion was kind of bizarre. I did it in a really dumb way. Of course, there you go, seeing me trying to get rid of my dang nose cone. Should have used a decoupler over that docking port. Oh, don't hit the spacecraft. Here I am narrating this like 24 hours later, and I'm still worried about things hitting the spacecraft. What am I doing? Okay, just checking the cooling. But you notice I've actually run out of power. Because, well, that's just how things work in this universe. And I can't open the solar panels myself, so I kind of have to ship Bill out to have him do it. That goes by in a flash, and then of course it's back into the capsule. Of course, with the solar panels active, now we have power. I've gone ahead and disabled the cooling on the hydrogen tanks, mainly because I'll lose so little of it with how long I'll be in orbit. And you'll find that power ends up being a perennial issue. So of course, we just come around to our circularization burn. We light the S4C engines for but a flash, and just tap it in, make sure we circularize, go back to prograde. And now we're working for our Munar insertion, but I've noticed a bit of a problem by this point. I haven't actually taken a look at it, but I realized that my life support supplies also did not carry over into the finished build. This thing originally had about 800 units of power and some capacitors that would have given me 800 units each, which would have been plenty of power to last me with the cooling. But for whatever reason, those did not carry over. So now we have a serious problem because these Kerbals will essentially become tourists if I don't finish the mission and get back in 3 days and 18 hours. And it's going to take us 16 hours just to get out there. However long it takes to dock with Project Fargo. And then, of course, however long it takes for us to land, reassume orbit, and get back home. If, as you might see, that's even possible. There we go, lighting the S4C stage for the trans-Munar injection burn. Just steadily burning through that stage. Now pretty quick, that stage is going to cut. And here's where I start getting concerned, because I thought I'd be able to do it with the S4C stage. But now I've just had to light my lander stage to finish the transfer to the moon. Of course, there I am. I get close, and then I don't even finish using the maneuver node. Just make sure I have an encounter, hold my trajectory, and then fine-tune my intended encounter down to about 200 kilometers, which I figured was pretty reasonable for being able to rendezvous with Project Fargo in a reasonable time. Now we're going in, I just set up the maneuver, get it ready to circularize, accidentally go to retro when I should have gone to node, and go ahead and deploy my gear, because why not? Of course, time accelerate down to the moon. It looks very different from 200 kilometers as compared to 100. And there I go, having to use my lander and return stage just to be able to get into a position here. Now, I got a slight out-of-plane error just based on time. Fargo's been in orbit for something like 1,300 orbits of the moon. It's just been sitting here waiting for us. Where's time accelerate over? You see how simple, although large, Project Houston is. So I'm now fine-tuning my plane, which actually means I kind of just flop around a little bit and waste a little bit of fuel. But there we go. Now it's time to begin the transfer process, which actually chops off about another 15 hours. Remember, we only have 3 days and 18 hours in which to complete this mission with the Kerbals in control. After that, we have to rely on probe control, which ordinarily would not be a problem, but it's just something I prefer not to do. Now I've completed the burn. What we're going to do is we're going to time accelerate in, and I'm going to hand it back over to past me to conduct the rendezvous and docking, because it's actually a little bit interesting in how I chose to do it.
Hey gang, it's past me again. I'm actually going to go ahead and drop back in here because it has been a while since you guys have seen me perform a rendezvous. I need to hurry up and get to my relative velocity negative. I think I left that just a little bit too late, because there we go. We're going to come whizzing past Project Fargo, which is really less than ideal. In fact, I'm going to use the engines just to help us out a little bit. Go towards the target now, please. I actually do still want my rendezvous HUD up. Okay, now we go back to relative velocity negative. We're going to be doing a little bit of this because I want to get really close, because I'm going to have to do the docking with Project Fargo, because this spacecraft does not have RCS on it. That's intentional. This is the passive docking partner. Once I get close enough in, I'm going to go ahead and bring us right alongside, and then I will switch vehicles over to Project Fargo. Okay, there we go, 0.08. I'm going to set this to, I'm going to target, I want to target Project Fargo's, or no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this in whatever orientation it wants to hold here. Let's put it in orbit prograde, just to give it an orientation, because I think that's holding orbit retro right now. Now, my fuel concern is actually starting to worry me a little, because I'm not sure what performance we'll get out of this engine. It might be better to offload this fuel into the spacecraft using TAC fuel balancer, and then just ditch this stage and rely on the fuel pod. Okay. So let's go ahead and bring up the RCS. Let's go into target mode. Set as target, engage angle snap. Go into parallel negative. Because that's what I want. That'll point me in the opposite direction. Now, for the first time, we bring up the Navy Fish docking port alignment indicatotron. And, oh, it's hibernated. That would be why my RCS isn't firing. Disable hibernation. Now we can make the probe make sense. Just give ourselves a little bit of distance here. Yeah, I still want to be going slightly retro for now. Oh, easy there. In fact, I'm going to enable fine controls just so I'm not quite hammering the throttle so hard. Go ahead and kick over that way. Just working it into line. Okay, we're now moving forward, which is good news. We're coming into lineup. I just noticed that I did those solar panels that way. That's convenient. Ready? Just easing the throttle over. Let it line up. We're drifting into line here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and bring up the docking lights just to help us out a little. Oh, drifting a little bit. Yeah, let's go ahead and start moving in. Just very slowly, because this is a very heavy vehicle. Mechanical Jeb, get out of the way. I'm going to go to 0.14. 0.16. We're drifting a little. Steady. Steady. Come on, lock up. Why aren't we locking up? This is not right at all. Come on, lock up, you bastard! Enable rigid, docking lights off. Come on, acquire, why don't you? Go ahead and back up a little, see if it'll go in. Okay, we bumped. Wow, I love how it took making it spin out of control to get it to lock up. Okay. We're going to go ahead and do our prep. I think I'm just going to go ahead and pull the fuel out of this into the main tanks with tack, and then dump this part of the vehicle, because we're just not going to get the performance out of it. Okay. Rocket fuel. That's the tank I want to transfer out. Okay, which tank is that? Transfer out. First, we want to make sure that's fully fueled. Now with Project Fargo, we can go ahead and decouple. Okay, 2,588 meters per second. Not ideal. But the good news is we can keep this attached until we burn through its fuel supply. Alright, I think this is going to be where we cut the episode, because we are prepared to attempt landing Project Houston in the next episode. But in the meantime, thanks everyone so much for tuning in. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit that notification bell, check out Twitch and Discord and my kitty in the description below. If you really like us, please consider supporting us on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, also in the description. In the meantime, this is Grania signing off. Thanks for watching, and take care.